Animas County Board of County Commissioners regular meeting. Today is Tuesday, May 6, 2025. It is now 9 a.m. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Please rise for an invocation by Commissioner Tony Haas, followed by the pledge of allegiance by Commissioner Lucero.
Dear Lord, thank you for this rain. We come before you today so that you would bring clarity to us. Help our eyes and ears to be open and understand what is before us. Help us to see through the confusion and guide us to the understanding. Illuminate our paths with your wisdom and light. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioners. Roll call,
Commissioner Hess.
Here.
Commissioner Searle.
Here.
Commissioner Lopez.
I'm here. Approval of the agenda. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Commissioner.
Thank you, sir. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second motion.
Commissioner Hess.
Yes.
Commissioner Searle.
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez.
Yes, thank you. Let me make an announcement. Today, exactly at 10 a.m., we have a public hearing. Regardless of where we are in the agenda and the items, we're going to stop the regular Board of County Commissioner meeting to enter into the published public hearing. So between now and then, we have quite a few items to get through. But I want to welcome all of you here today. Let me begin by going into section 2, consideration of minutes. We have the regular meeting minutes of April 15, 2025. And we also have the special meeting minutes of April 18, 2025. Commissioners, we have had those minutes. I would at this time entertain any discussion. Otherwise, I will also entertain a motion to approve those minutes as consent agenda item.
I'll move to approve both sets of minutes for April 15th and April 18th, 2025. Move to approve, please.
A second.
Commissioner Searle.
Yes.
Commissioner Hess.
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez.
Yes, thank you. We're going to go to section 3, reading of correspondence, Commissioner committee reports. Commissioner Lucero, your report, sir?
On April 21st, I attended the OPI meeting, that's the OCHR Partners meeting in La Habra. We had just general business. We didn't have any applications for business loans at that time. Also, on April the 24th, Commissioner Lopez was out of town, so I attended the TPR, the South Central Transportation Planning Region. At that meeting, they gave us a legislative update on their program, and also project updates that are ongoing. There's a few projects that have probably started with on I-25 both north and south of Trinidad. They're going to be replacing a lot of the guardrail, which they've already started. They're going to be resurfacing treatment and new striping and some minor structure repairs, so that will probably start here very shortly and go through the summer. Also, they presented the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan at that time. So, also on Friday, May 2nd, I was in the Aguilar area to meet with a few constituents, kind of going over a few of the roads that they had some concerns with. I had a constituent that was concerned with the subdivision that's off of 53.7. There's several RVs out there. There's a couple of buses. His concern was that they were living out there and no septic system. So I did tell him I would check into that. Also, on that same day, I got a call from a constituent concerning the mag chloride that was put on County Road 75. I think it was Thursday and Friday, Wednesday and Thursday, I think is when they put that down. Then it happened to rain all day Thursday, so it made it pretty slick, and they had some concerns with that. So I did get with Keith and gave him the lady's phone number. So he was in turn going to contact the lady to see what her concerns were. I did report Mr. Dornkamp on that. So that's my report.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Hess?
On the 21st and the 24th, I was invited to attend the Colorado Outdoor Partnership Summit. CPW, DNR, DWR, BLM, Nature Conservancy, Trust for Public Land, Keystone, all of them were there and the directors were present. This three-day summit involved many state departments as well as the governor and his staff for the unveiling of the Colorado Outdoor Strategy. I was asked to be on several informational panels representing ag and local government concerns with the strategy. My interest in the co-op started when the Colorado Outdoor Strategy was considering moving from public land and possibly onto private land. I was curious how this approach would occur. As a private property rights advocate, I wanted assurances that the process be voluntary first, and secondly, any project would have to be planned by the private property owner, recognizing that every ranch is unique in its own way and only if he chose to participate. Then on the 25th, we had our CCI Legislative Steering Committee, took positions on several different bills, and I'm going to end with that in the essence of time.
Thank you, sir. And as well, I'm going to make my report brief. Just want to remind everyone that the General Assembly is still on calendar. The last day is going to be this Saturday, May 10th. Right now, we have 72 bills in the pipeline that are coming, 72 House bills. We have 39 Senate bills. And so they have quite a heavy schedule for the few days that they have left. And if anyone is interested in testifying, please do so. This Board of County Commissioners is very active in opposing and supporting some of the legislation that has come out of this 2025 session. So I want to remind all of you that there are some pretty heavy bills in there. I'm not going to mention them to you, but there is one that certainly it is the Senior Housing Income Tax Credit Extension. There is so many things in there, but the idea is that these legislators are working toward the wee hours of the night, and so certainly if there's any interest from the constituents or anyone here, please log online, and certainly it is Colorado General Assembly. That is the website that will get you to sign up for any testimony. So thank you. We're going to close with that on the Commissioner Committee reports. I'm going to go now if there is any elected official that would be interested in providing an update. Let me call on County Assessor, Clerk and Recorder, Treasurer, Sheriff, District Attorney, Coroner. Hearing that, it is now my honor to introduce, we're going to have a presentation from Commissioner John Messner and Environmental Unit Staff Member Rick Allison. Mr. Chris, welcome to as well to the Board of County Commissioners. Commissioner, welcome back. You're welcome to occupy the table or come up to the podium, whatever works. And certainly this is one of the projects that has been going on for quite some time, and we appreciate the opportunity to be the first to hear this information that eventually will become part of the rulemaking for the ECMC. Very good. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thanks for having us here today. It's a beautiful rainy day. Always happy to be in Los Animas County again. My name is John Messner. I'm a Commissioner with the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission. With me here today, as you've indicated, is Rick Allison and Chris Sanchez. We're excited to be able to share with you the findings that will be published as part of the directive of Senate Bill 23-186, which asked ECMC to conduct a study around natural methane seeps in the Raton Basin, as well as looking at produced water quality associated with oil and gas development also in the basin. This study is more than likely the most thorough study that's ever been done on these two topics, with the goal of better understanding both the natural methane seeps that are occurring in the basin, as well as looking at the water quality associated with the different oil and gas activities within that area. And so, as I think you all know, the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission is the regulatory agency that regulates oil and gas development, geothermal, carbon capture and sequestration, and underground natural gas storage in a way that ensures protection of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. We were honored to be able to undertake this study, and as part of this, we wanted to make sure that the local governments in which this study took place were the first to hear the information associated with it. And so you are hearing it second. We had talked to Referendum County last week, and then this will be shared with the legislature, I think, in June. So with that, I'd like to introduce Rick, who's going to give us a presentation, and then we're available to answer any questions afterwards. There'll be two different parts to this, obviously two pretty distinct things, one being methane seepage, and the other being the water quality piece. And so if it works for you all, we may ask if you have any questions after each of those sections, because they are really distinct.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner. And Commissioners, thank you for your time this morning. So, as was mentioned, the SB 23186 project really focused on two major areas. One was methane seepage mapping in the Raton Basin, and the second was evaluating water quality of produced water produced during coal bed methane operations. As such, we divided the project into kind of those two buckets, and the presentation and report we're going to publish also kind of follows the same format. Therefore, this morning, we're going to start with the methane seep mapping portion. Chris Sanchez will present that information, and then from there, we can answer questions about that and move on into the water quality section of the study. Chris, would you like?
Sure. If you don't mind, I'm going
Please.
to pull you just a little bit more comfortable. Thank you. Well, again, thank you, everybody, for this opportunity to present our findings for Senate Bill 23186. I'd like to start out by saying that one of the key takeaways we found with this study is that aerial surveying is very expensive. One of the key components that we had while we were conducting this methane seep study of the Raton Basin is we actually utilized a helicopter with LiDAR capabilities to actually fly several areas in the basin to be able to determine where the naturally occurring methane seeps were. The ECMC and its contractor identified a subset of areas to target with that helicopter and that equipment. Approximately 75 square miles of the Raton Basin was flown. The target areas were selected based on areas that were most likely to have seep. We used information from previous surveys that were conducted, so there were a couple previous surveys that were conducted in 2001, 2005, I believe, and 2015. So what we learned from that previous information is that a lot of these seeps were actually in low-lying areas. Now, this was attributed to erosion, exposed coal seams, exposed fractured rocks, just anywhere where that gas could actually escape out of the ground. You will see on this slide here behind me and before me there's a map there on the left that has some orange boxes or kind of an orange overlay. Those are actually the areas that were studied with the helicopter. In addition, you'll see on the right-hand side there's a map, and I do understand those dots are a little hard to see, but there are several purple dots outlined along that map, and those are just the target areas. Those are actually areas that had seeps identified. The total time spent in the air was approximately 10 days in summer of 2024. And what we did find is that with the total flight data, we did find that there were 124 preliminary detection areas. 99 of those areas were labeled as suspected seep areas. We were able to gain access to 45 of those 99 suspected seeps. 28 of those seeps were studied with equipment capable of measuring flux rates, so basically being able to determine how much methane was actually coming out of the ground at those spots. Next slide, please. This figure shows 26 of the 99 suspected seep areas. We were able to gain access to all of these sites depicted to obtain measurements. Some of the points you see are actually one single seep. The way the equipment worked is it identified a bunch of subset points or a bunch of points in an area, but once you actually get on the ground with a pedestrian survey, it was actually determined a lot of these areas may be one large seep. You may note that the seeps are located along the Purgatory River and its tributaries, and again, this is attributed to the exposed coal seams and fractured rocks in those cuts in the canyons or in the valleys. Next slide, please. So the pedestrian survey consisted of using a flux meter, which involves placing a chamber. Maybe a little hard to see, but the photo on the left there actually shows a gentleman standing with a chamber or a kettle. And what is done with that equipment is it's actually placed on the ground. And what that piece of equipment does is it allows methane to accumulate inside. It actually pulls the methane up into it. It allows it to accumulate inside where you can actually identify the emissions rate. So the way this survey was conducted is the contractor went out with this kettle and basically tested areas all along these suspected seep areas until he found the outer perimeter or the boundaries. So once the areas were identified, they actually came back in and did a little bit of research on what would be a good grid system or a good grid pattern to go over to develop and collect several measurements within that boundary. By doing so, you were able to collect your flow rates or your flux rates, and then there was an algorithm that was used to determine the total flux rate over the entire seep area.
Commissioner Messner, pardon the interruption. I think as we have a question, let me go ahead and make this interactive, if that's okay with you.
I already like to
Yes.
handle it, yeah.
So right here, my question to you, Mr. Sanchez, is you were able to, by using the algorithm, be able to calculate based upon the aerial survey, and then once you were doing the pedestrian walking survey, to calculate the actual amount of methane that was being basically exposed onto the ground.
Correct.
And so what was the accuracy from the aerial view to the actual survey on the ground?
Mr. Ellison, I think you had a little bit more background with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the helicopter survey, one of the difficulties is with the topographic effects, being able to calculate that mass. They've got to sort of have a kind of upwind and downwind comparison, and the terrain effects make that very difficult. So that's one of the key reasons we followed up with a pedestrian survey. They're kind of two, and I think Chris will get into this, but one of them is to really make sure we knew the actual, we could estimate the amount of mass of methane coming out of the ground. The helicopters can do it, but it's definitely a lot easier in flat terrain than the terrain we have here.
Chris, I have a question. The seepage areas that you identified on this study, are they different than the ones that were identified in 2001 and 2005?
Some are the exact same areas and others are just off the beaten path a little bit. When the surveys were conducted in 2001, 2005, and 2015, those were all driving surveys. So at that point in time, they used equipment, the best equipment that they had at that time. And so what was happening is there was a vehicle that was retrofitted with a sniffer, if you will, had a little air down in the front of it, and this would drive along the access roads. And any time that there was a hit of methane, that's where they would actually stop and collect a point. So those seeps at that time, there really wasn't a good indication of where the actual seep was. It was just noted points of methane accumulation. So this particular survey here using the aerial
imagery or the LiDAR through the helicopter gave us a much better indication of where the actual seeps are. So we were able to determine a handful of new seeps that previously weren't identified during the dry survey.
To that point, I want to ask you, so because we were more active in our gas development back in 2001, did you see the rates get higher because we're less active now?
So to be honest with you, and we will get to that a little bit further down in the presentation. However, when those surveys were conducted, there wasn't actually, they didn't actually collect measurements or usable data for those measurements. So this study is actually the first time we do have a good baseline to identify what the actual seepage rate is at this point. So that will allow us in the future, if there is additional work to be done, that actually gives a good baseline to go off. Okay, any other questions? Okay. So in addition to collecting the flux measurements on the ground, the contractor also did a shallow subsurface soil gas sample from these areas to analyze for gas composition. We were looking for stable isotopes of methane. An instrument known as a slide hammer and a hand pump were used to obtain these gas samples. The center photo you can see depicted here is an example of a larger seep where pedestrian survey was conducted. The photo to the left and the right are two smaller seep areas. During the study, there was one key note that we took away. Areas that showed signs of lack of vegetation or signs of distressed vegetation were pretty common with these seep areas. So that was one of the ways we were also able to conduct a very thorough pedestrian survey. Next slide, please. So this slide here shows the largest seep, which was labeled as SS865. So this seep was actually 3 suspected seeps during the aerial survey. Whenever the helicopter flew over, it appeared that there were 3 different seeps in this area. The figure on the right shows the figure on the right shows the seepage rates based on measured flux over several points. In this figure, the areas of the darker colors ranging from purple and dark red represent the higher flux measurements, while lighter colors, orange, yellow, and white represent the lower flux rates. So this particular seep here was identified to be a pretty good area of seepage. Next slide, please. So in summary, approximately 75 square miles of Raton Basin was surveyed. We recognize that this is only a subset of the basin, with 99 potential seeps and access to 45 of those seeps within the Raton Basin. It was determined 29 of the 45 had measurable methane seepage. If you look at the figure here on slide 7, you'll note at the time of survey, a small number of seeps accounts for the largest overall emission. Total emissions of all seeps combined is 4,177 kilograms per day, while the largest seep alone contributed 1,758 kilograms a day of that total. This histogram shows us the distribution of emissions or methane seepage rates across all measured seeps. And if you actually look at this histogram here, on the left is actually the highest volume. So that's actually one seep there. Is that correct? If it's on the left or is it back flipped? I apologize.
Okay.
So
Number of seeps.
number of seeps is on the left. And then on the right shows actually the largest seep that we had in the basin. So that actually shows that 1,758 kilograms per day there. The majority of the seeps have relatively low seepage rates, and 7 of the 29 measured account for 88% of the total measured methane seepage in the Raton Basin. As a comparison, this represents 292,000 cubic feet per day of methane being released from these seeps. This equates to less than 1% of the total natural gas produced by the CBM well production. in the Raton Basin, which averaged 143 million cubic feet per day in 2024.
Less than 1%.
Less than 1%. Next slide, please. So the next steps that we have. So there were a couple areas that at the time of our project window, we were not able to gain access. And so we would like to conduct further evaluations of a couple seeps that were identified on the northern side of Highway 12, just across from the Primero School, which you can see depicted here. So there were some seeps that were identified during the aerial survey. And as mentioned, unfortunately, we weren't able to get ground access to these areas, so we weren't actually able to determine what the source of that seep is. Is it a naturally occurring seep, or is it something that's attributed to maybe household, something within the household, something like that? So we are looking to try and reattempt access in these areas to be able to actually get boots on the ground and do a pedestrian survey for this area here. Some of the other things that we would like to do here is actually identify seepage rates, if it is naturally occurring, and access the potential risk for the properties. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the largest measured seep as an example. This large seep would be, so next steps would be mitigation. So those are some goals that we're looking at, potential goals we're looking at is mitigation for larger seeps. So this slide here actually shows the largest measured seep, which you had previously seen in a slide before. So this area here would actually be mitigated for two reasons. To improve vegetation by removing methane gas from the root zone. Methane displaces oxygen and affects the soil chemistry, leading to distressed or dead vegetation. So secondary goal is for methane capture and destruction to prevent methane seep. This naturally occurring methane seepage from contributing to greenhouse gases.
So my question is, how big of the space of the land measure, if you will, in acres or square feet or square meters? How big is on this, the largest seep that you have identified, how big is that? And then, of course, I see the mitigation goals. Is that going to be the responsibility of the operator, landowner? How is that going to work?
Those are some good questions. Mr. Allison, do you have?
Sure. So again, this seep covers maybe about 8 acres of land, represented by, just measuring that contour map we have on the right. This is by far the largest seep that we gained access to, so it's a very high-end example. In terms of, responsibility, there really is not necessarily a requirement, especially for a seep like this one. It would be kind of up to the landowner's wishes if they wanted to revegetate that to improve the vegetation and to, maybe reduce some of the wildfire hazard that could be associated with, you do two things. You reduce that potential wildfire hazard, but you also improve habitat, especially for, this is on a large range. And Chris will get into this maybe a little bit later, but some of our future work, we are exploring additional grant funding opportunities to look at some of the potential options for mitigation. And then I'll pause and see, Chris may cover, like mitigation around the safety hazard. That's, probably certainly even higher priority.
And I guess my follow-up question on that would be, since the legislature approved SB 23-186 and the fiscal bill came out with a certain dollar amount, would they be able, now that you're going to go back in June, to reconsider and increase the funding, as you mentioned, or would the grant funding come from CDBHE and or any other agency?
Okay.
So, there's a couple of different things there. We're looking for grant funding in any and all places as far as looking at different studies or following up with mitigations. And, there was lots of opportunities with the federal government over the years to be able to access grant funding to look at different mitigation strategies associated with greenhouse gas emissions or revegetation efforts. I think, as we all know, those are a little bit in the air right now, and so that doesn't mean that they're not available, but I think it becomes a little more challenging at this point. And I think you all probably realize in the state legislature that bills that have a fiscal note associated with them right now are relatively discouraged. And so the funding pool right now is pretty thin, but that doesn't mean that this doesn't sit high on our list of things that we want to continue to work on, especially now that we have a baseline study to work from. And so I think that there are opportunities, and I think that there's opportunities to work with legislators to see if there's options moving forward, but I mean, there's not a clear path right now. There was no additional funding tied to the 2386.
To go along with the first question that I asked, trying to identify whether or not that when we were actually going in there and extracting that gas, did that lower the levels? Because in a place like this, it looks like that would be pertinent for safety and health reasons.
Sure. I think as both Chris and Rick had indicated, unfortunately, the previous studies were done in a way that it didn't create a measurable baseline for us to make a determination like that. And so there's different studies that have happened in different places, not in this space, and specifically that have indicated both that, drilling associated with coal bed methane wells has potentially reduced natural seeps. It's also been studies that have indicated that it's increased it. So as hard as it is to say, this is going to be an inconclusive study, right? But it does create a baseline, and certainly is going to be able to identify and hopefully continue to identify any potential safety hazards. So health and safety hazards would be the first priority of things that we would want to identify, and then looking at developing another study that would be able to compare to this as far as any reduction or increase associated with natural seeps from continued CBM well development. And that's where we're at with this study.
So let me make a comment, and please correct me, because I'm just going to go out and so even before the gas extraction, this phenomenon was probably present.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes.
That's right.
Proceed.
Okay, so next slide, please. So in summary, again, to cover something that was previously asked, this particular study actually creates the baseline. So we weren't actually able to determine if there were any differences in historic seepage rate prior to CBM production. One of the other key factors in that as well is the studies or the baseline measurements were not collected prior to CBM extraction here in the Raton Basin. So CBM extraction predates the first study that was actually collected in 2001. And again, the data that was collected at that point in time, the measurements just weren't there. So they just weren't strong enough to show what the actual flux rate was at that point in time. This study does present mitigation options if needed, and those are a couple items that Mr. Allison actually covered on. So, we want to ensure that there is adequate seep characterization, that the seeps are actually identified, the boundaries are identified if future studies are able to be conducted. Evaluate the hazard to public or homeowners. That is one of the biggest concerns. If you do have a very large seep next to a home, that is something that would be more of a concern than, maybe something that's kind of out in the middle of a pasture. The mitigation side of things is, that's something that would have to be looked into a little bit. But the mitigation, seep, I recover the soil gas from seepage areas itself next to buildings, would be something similar to a radon system, or potentially something similar to a radon system that may help to alleviate some of that methane coming into a home if that is present. Improve vegetation and recover methane, and again, help to reduce that greenhouse gas emissions from these naturally occurring seeps.
And in water wells. I mean, there are actual water wells coming, that happen in Morphin County. And I know it happens up here too, where Joe lives, up in that area also.
So ECMC plans to reattempt land access on the selected seats that we previously mentioned near term, and is evaluating funding for further study expansions. Potentially the earliest we'll know something would be Q2 of 2026. And so that's basically everything I have. Any other questions or?
Chris, on one of your slides, you identified several areas of corruption at the middle school.
Yes.
Is that really a concern to the middle school? Because I think at one time, years ago, they ended up putting methane detectors in the school as a precautionary, and I don't know what was determined off of that.
Okay, so with regard to that, without being able to get on the ground and actually evaluate those seeps, it's really hard to make that determination right now. The only thing that we do have is the aerial imagery. And on the aerial imagery, there is always the chance for drift. So you always have that chance that your seep may be located here, but you're seeing a big plume just off to the side a little bit due to that drift. So that is the main reason why we really would like to try and reattempt access back in this area to actually get people on the ground and determine what the flux rates are there. So.
And maybe explain what the access issue is.
So, yes, good point. Access issue there is a lot of those surface owners there are absentee surface owners. Whenever we did attempt access in the beginning, we did send out a round of postcards, letters to the surface owner of file per, clerk and recorder records. Unfortunately, we didn't get a response back on that particular area. These homes are either rented or, again, the landowner is absentee, and for some reason we just didn't get a response back. So we are going to try a couple different methods, depending on funding, we are going to try a couple different methods to try and gain access to these surfaces, to try and at least make contact with the surface owner. Now, I do want to just put this out there, please keep in mind, we can always be denied access. There is that possibility that you will provide information to somebody and they're like, nope, we don't want you on the property, so access is denied. So at that point in time, we'll just move on to the next and see what we can do and try our best to get access.
So what is the relationship between the ground owner versus the mineral rights owner? If somebody has a well, they don't own the property, when they have mineral rights, how do you access those properties?
That's a little different on this side. So we would actually need to obtain access from the surface owner here, just to make sure that they are aware of what we're doing.
You're physically walking on the property.
Yes, you're physically walking on the property. The other scenario you brought up there is a little different. That's more into the mineral rights side of things and extraction, production of minerals. So.
Yeah, well, and the lease associated with it.
Lease associated, yes.
That's right.
If could this be developed in a way that it would be carbon captured and you can catch that and maybe if it could be developed, that would offset the cost tremendously.
That's right. I mean, there are opportunities for carbon capture and sequestration. There's opportunities for carbon capture and combustion. There's carbon credit offset markets that could be utilized to help develop funding mechanisms for that. So there's different mitigation strategies that can be employed. It's just whether or not there's access to those markets or not. So I think there's a lot of different ways that this can be approached.
A work in progress.
It is, and I'll just add, there's probably the one example we do have in the state is a mitigation system in the San Juan Basin, and it's been operational for some years, and it was installed kind of in the Wetland Creek area, South Fork, Texas Creek, and it recovers methane, runs a generator to provide electricity back to the grid. It's definitely heavily subsidized, it's an economic loser, but it proved successful in recovering that, both destructing the methane and turning it into energy and recovering that vegetation.
Well, it looks like in these places where it's highly recognizable, with the red areas on those maps, that would be, a no-brainer to put it right there.
Yeah, and that source is definitely the best way to mitigate these where the seep is expressing itself. Absolutely. And then, of course, those seepage rates vary quite a bit. So we have all those red dots, but a lot of those really small ones we have on the left side of the graph. So maybe you don't make, you may borderline make enough methane. So there's a calculation for sure that goes into play.
Interesting.
So the overall, let me close with this question, the overall seepage is less than 1%. In perspective, going back to Commissioner Hass's question, on that big 8-acre parcel that you mentioned, that there's possibly the majority of the seepage, one of the largest ones, would be cost efficient for the landowner to capture, produce some kind of energy, or at least burn it right on site, and that would be one of the mitigation processes from the state perspective, the partnership, public-private partnership, to be able to, it's a hazard. Somebody that is walking around there, I mean, we see that the vegetation is one thing, but then, I don't know, in terms of scientific data, what the 1% would mean to a human, individual. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. So we look forward to, now you mentioned that you're going to attempt to get access to those properties. Hopefully you do, and you're going to be presenting to the legislature in June. And what is after that, Commissioner Messner? After you present to the legislature, I mean, they're going to go the rulemaking process, basically, go through the process, implementation, and what do you see next steps?
So there's no rulemaking attached to this. I mean, unless we deem that there's some rule that needs to get modified or created in order to be able to address this particularly, the methane seepage piece. As far as the requirements associated with Senate Bill 23-186, that'll be completed once we present to the legislature. Now, depending on what the legislature sees and hears and how they want to proceed, there could be additional legislation that would be introduced to further a study at some point. We could be directed to undertake a study by the legislature as well, or internally we can make a determination that we want to continue looking at this. And I think both Rick and Chris have indicated that we're looking at lots of different avenues to continue this research and try to understand and better categorize what potential options that are moving forward. So, but I think that there's a lot of interesting opportunities, and I think we'll also continue to work together with Evergreen Resources to try to understand what opportunities there may be with them as well.
Just regarding the potential of plume to flow, 292 MCF, I believe, is what you had estimated was seeping out of the ground per day. What kind of percentage is that to the overall contribution to greenhouse gases here in the United States? I guess my question is it a waste of taxpayers' money, except for the plume flow? Is it a waste of taxpayers' money to continue this kind of study?
Rick, do you have any? I'm not really familiar with that. Do you?
Well, I guess I will try to add some context about how much methane and how representative we think that is of the natural seepage in the basin. And maybe not talk about if it's a waste of money, but you all can discuss that part of it. So we, if we zoom out of the basin, we only were able to fly maybe about 10% of the basin with that helicopter because it's pretty expensive. And the fiscal notice, we didn't have the funding to do it. So we targeted in areas we suspected there would be seeps. So the question is, we fly more of the basin, do we find seeps at the same rate? Or do we find fewer of them in those new areas because we were already looking for where we thought they would be? And that's just kind of an unknown. So I think there's certainly, I think, value to the community in knowing more about it on a broader scale, so that we can get a better answer to that question about how much of the natural seepage is contributing to the overall methane emissions, both in Los Animas and Huerfano County, but then also on a more larger scale, statewide, nationwide kind of thing. But I just don't think we have quite enough data to compare fully.
Okay, thank you.
And it doesn't hurt that you have the expert on your team.
Expert in progress.
Yes.
I'm learning from a very talented scientist.
Again, the whole thing is, we want to be certain that we know what's happening. What is the cost, the return on investment, and what impacts is that to public health? That is where we stand, and again, for ECMC and the rules and regulations to operate here in Colorado, I think we're one of the most regulated states. I think we have the cleanest extraction of any energy from fossil fuels. So from that perspective, we are protecting the environment, public safety, but we also have to understand that some of these, as you said, Mr. Sanchez, some of the landowners may say, you know what, we're okay the way it is, and we just have to respect that as well. So we have a little bit of water as well.
Do we have time to go to the water? Yep.
We have about 10 minutes, and yes, 10 minutes, and then we will have to get into the next portion of the meeting.
Okay, well, I'll move as quickly as I can and just interrupt me with any questions that you have so that we can answer as many questions, as you have coming to this. Quickly, this is the first real comprehensive look at the water we've been able to do. There's been previous studies done, and we did incorporate the results of those. You probably remember EPA did a big study down here, the COGCC. My predecessor did a big study down here around issues with TBA. We incorporated all of that data into this. In 2021, the ECMC rulemaking required any operator in the state that stores water in a pit to sample that water. So we have, there's several pits in the basin, so we have hundreds of water samples. And then we also took a very broad approach and selected a number of wells of our own to sample for this study for a very, very large list of parameters to get a good characterization. So this represents that list of parameters. I won't go through them all, but the point here is that we added many things based on EPA has a pollutant concentration guidance for potential reuse of waters in the western United States. And we also added PFAS, the forever chemicals that you hear about, simply because there's a statewide effort to understand the nature of where those exist in the environment and prevent introducing more of it into the environment if we can. So I have a series of slides that represents kind of where we sampled and the key parameters we found that we think are probably important to consider for reuse going forward. So first of all, the tiny red dots on this map represent all of the CBN wells that we already have data for, either from previous studies or from all of those required pit samples from the operators. The stars on the map are then samples we collected, and those red and pink pentagons are the locations of the natural seeps that we mapped, the natural methane seeps. None of those were seeping any water. They were all dry gas, so we don't have any water samples from that. All of the water we evaluated was the raw produced water straight from the well, so it had not gone through any treatment in the intent of that was to evaluate, that raw water and its quality and potential for reuse. I got about 4 more maps that show some of the key compounds we detected that would be of concern for potential reuse. And one of those is sodium. There's a couple takeaways from these series of slides, and I think the key theme you'll see is variability. So there's variability on a geographic basis within the basin for the quality of the water, and there's and then each parameter kind of has a broad range of variability at which point that was detected. So some of the water samples were fairly good quality, some of them had higher concentrations of some of these compounds. So you can see the sodium in the central part of the basin. That's kind of around Burrow Canyon and Lawrencito Canyon area, has the highest concentrations of sodium detected, kind of the overall highest salinity of all of the waters. And then this figure on the right is a box plot that shows our 2 sample sets. So the blue is all the data we already had, and then the orange are the 24 wells we sampled as part of this study. And again, the big takeaway with that picture is there's a lot of variability. There's kind of a long range of many samples that get pretty high in sodium. The chloride follows a similar pattern in the basin. It often occurs in tandem with sodium. And a key point here to note is we needed something to compare these results to, so we used drinking water standards and groundwater standards. Chloride kind of has an overall water quality standard of 250 milligrams per liter, and at least half of the samples exceed that. And so we use that as a starting point to dig a little bit further into those numbers in the report. There are 2 more parameters I want to point out with these maps. One are the fluoride results, and the fluoride differs from the sodium and chloride in that, one, it is actually widespread through the basin, and it's persistently at fairly elevated levels compared to drinking water. Both drinking water standards and standards we found for livestock consumption in the literature. So those 2 red lines in that box plot show the EPA health-based standard for fluoride is 4 milligrams per liter, and roughly half of all samples exceed that. And then the bottom line is the 2 milligram per liter line for fluoride, and that is more of an overall water quality standard, but that is also the standard we quite often found for livestock and wildlife and literature. That would be the preferred benchmark for water quality. We can see, basic, both geographically and in the number of samples, there's quite a few exceedances of fluoride.
So I realize that we're getting this information ahead of anybody else, even the legislators. But the ranchers in the area that these levels are high,
Right.
that should be the next priority, right? Should let them know, because if they're using a domestic well for their house, I mean, it's not going to be good news, but it's better than getting cancer or whatever later, right?
Yeah, I do want to make a distinction about like domestic water wells versus this water. We also, you'll know this, we have a huge data set of water well data in this basin. And if that well's been sampled, that well owner should have those results in hand. And it looks like there's variability in the water wells, but overall, they're generally lower in concentrations than what we're seeing here in these produced waters from the coal bed wells.
And I was talking just about the produced wells.
Okay.
Because a lot of those are getting put in pits and they're monitored heavily, but looking at the graphics here, there's some areas that probably need to be released. Yeah.
And in the I'll jump to just in the very end of these slides, and we did email a copy to all of you if we don't get them. There are ways on our website that all this data is publicly available now. And so, I have these wells on my land, do they have water data for them? That can be accessed today.
So there is a relationship between CDPHE and the local public health that is actually having access to this, that should have access to the study as well. In the event that somebody calls through the local public health, hey, I have a concern here, I want my water tested, simply because we're getting a runoff from produced water. So I think, the relationship between the two agencies, ECMC and CDPHE, has got to be so seamless for that information to flow back to the users here in San Luis County.
Yes, and we have worked very closely with the Water Quality Control Division at CDPHE during this study. So they've collaborated with us throughout. And we've also, we have shared some of these findings with the local health department as well. And of course, the final report post, everybody will have access.
And we forgot to mention that online with us here today is Nathan Moore from CDPHE as well, who was part of the development of this study. And so any questions you have that you want to direct to CDPHE, he's good to answer this question.
Well, there's hundreds of these others that are probably safe enough for livestock use, but there's that general cluster that would probably be beneficial if those individuals knew.
Yeah, and any recommendations that you might have as far as how best to reach out to ranchers or let some of the ranchers know.
And another point I'd like to make, the blanket approach that all of them have had, that's not right either. That cluster, the cluster, I would say, okay, I agree with that. We've got pretty extreme with our rules and regs, and there's some of those that should be able to be used for livestock, if nothing else.
Yeah, I think Rick will get into that a little later on in his presentation, but I think the theme is variability, right? So there's lots of variability.
So Commissioner Mester, let me interrupt. We're going to go into the public hearing, but let me invite you. This is so important. I don't know how long this is going to take, but you're more than welcome to take a recess, and we want you to come back because this information, we have a lot of viewers online that also find this information very, very imperative. So at this time, if it's okay with all of you, what I'm going to call for a small recess, 2-3 minutes, to get into the public hearing, and after we're done with that, you're more than welcome to continue the presentation. Okay? All right. And pardon the interruption there.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Commissioners, I'll entertain a motion to take a small recess, 3 minutes.
Second. Commissioner Searle?
Yes.
Commissioner Hess?
Yes.
Commissioner Lopez?
Yes. 2 minutes.